What's going on, movie fans? My name is Michael Weer. I love talking about movies, and today we're going to talk about the newest book-to-movie adaptation, The Marsh King's Daughter. Now, when I first saw this preview in theaters a couple weeks ago, I had no idea it was once a book. It just reminded me of a book-to-movie adaptation, because I feel like we get at least one of these a year, where a woman has a very abusive past, she gets away from it, she gets to a place in her life where she seems safe, but then her past comes and catches up to her, and she has to stand up to it. And that's basically the synopsis. We'll get to more of the synopsis in a minute. But with all that said, I looked it up, and sure enough, yep, it is a book-to-movie adaptation. And again, we get about one of these a year, and I told myself, okay, if I get the chance, I will go to the theater, I will check this thing out, and I got the chance. So let's do the review for The Marsh King's Daughter.
This is where we belong.
I waited my whole life to see you again. I wasn't sure what I would feel when I did.
So The Marsh King's Daughter is directed by Neil Berger. It stars Daisy Ridley as the title character, the Marsh King's daughter. It also stars Ben Mendelsohn as sort of the title character in The Marsh King. It also stars Gil Birmingham as Clark, the man who takes in the younger version of Daisy Ridley's character when she is taken out of her bad situation in the first place. And of course, Gil Birmingham plays one of my favorite characters on Yellowstone in Thomas Rainwater. There's just something cool about seeing a guy who is like the exact opposite of Kevin Costner in that show. And they both mean well for the land, but they're coming at it from two very different places. I don't know. I love his character. And the final person of note to talk about in this movie is Garrett Hedlund, who plays Stephen, the husband of the grown-up version of Daisy Ridley's character in Helena. And what was cool about seeing him in this movie is I haven't seen him since he was Jack Mercer in Four Brothers. It's cool to see him acting again, and I'd love to see him in more stuff. And to be clear, I don't think he stopped acting. I just haven't watched any of the other movies he's made between Four Brothers and now. But again, it was nice to see him. So with all that said, let's get into the synopsis of this movie. And essentially, you have a situation where there's a young girl who's in captivity with her mother. This man is holding them against their will, but you don't really know that at the beginning of the movie. It sort of unfolds in the first act, and it's actually done really well. But when they finally do get out of captivity and they get away from him, he ends up going to jail. And then that character of Helena grows up to the Daisy Ridley version of that character. She's gotten to a place where she has a husband, she has a small child of her own now, and she's sort of moved past all of that trauma the best that she can. But then her father finds a way to break out of prison, and his whole goal is to get Helena, get his granddaughter, get them back together as a family, because in his mind, that's how it should be, and he considers himself the Marsh King. And that's the best synopsis I can give you. Now, if you want a better synopsis or a different synopsis, you can go to IMDb, where they say a woman seeks revenge after a man who kidnapped her mother. That's the whole synopsis. That is the laziest synopsis I've ever seen for a movie. But it's not even a real synopsis. So I've given you the best that I can. I hope you like that. If that sounds like a good movie to you, you can go check it out in theaters now, or it'll be on a streaming service in the next like 45 days for sure. Probably Netflix. If I had to guess, it'll go to Netflix. But with all that said, let's get into my likes and some of my dislikes. The first like I have for this movie's got to be that opening act where you have this girl who's in captivity with her mother, because that's really the only mysterious part of the movie, the part of the movie where you have questions, because after that it's pretty paint by numbers, which is a little bit of a drop off, and that's too bad. But I did like that opening act because you see this girl who's being trained to be a hunter. She's being trained to live in the wild. And you're like, okay, maybe they're just like doomsday parents. But then things get weirder and more abusive. And you're like, oh, this is a bad situation for them. They need to get out of this. And so I like that you're sort of learning along with the characters. It's really fun to watch. So I like that you're sort of learning along with the character of Helena about how bad this relationship with her father really is. The next like I have for this movie's got to be the acting by those four characters that I mentioned earlier. I think Daisy Ridley brings it. I think Ben Mendelsohn does a great job in this movie. Gil Birmingham is a great supporting character, as is Garrett Hedlund. I think both of them do a great job being supporting characters that are sort of like, what's going on outside of this main storyline? So I like both of them sort of filling in there, and they do a really good job. I do have a little bit of a problem with the Stephen character, but that's more the writing than it is the actual acting from the actor. And so, like I said, the acting is in that category. The final thing I really like in this movie is when Helena finally explains to Stephen how she got all of these tattoos that are all over her body. And it's a very powerful scene in that she's never explained to her husband the real story of all of these tattoos she has all over her body. And so she takes a second to stand there and tell him, this is when I got this one, this is when I got this one, this is how I got this is how I got this. And she shows him her body of tattoos that were given to her as punishments from her abusive father. And it's just the scene worked for me. Outside of the rest of the movie where you get past that first act and the story is kind of weak or paint by numbers, I really thought that scene in particular between Daisy Ridley and Garrett Hedlund, where they're standing there in the driveway of their house and she's finally coming to terms with telling her husband about all of the abuse she endured from her father. Again, I think it's a very powerful moment. I think it was done very well. So I got to give the movie a like for that. But getting into the dislikes I have for this movie, the first one would be the Steven character and how he's written. While I liked the acting from that actor, I didn't really like how they wrote that character. So you basically have this very seemingly loving relationship between Helena and Steven, and then when Steven's there with Helena and the police are in their house and they're explaining to them that the Marsh Keen's out, he's like, well, why does it matter to us? And then she has to reveal to him in that moment that she is the Marsh Keen's daughter. And you see his hand on her back, and then he takes his hand off her back. And I do understand to a point, like being in shock, like, whoa, we've been married for this long, we have a kid, and you never told me about this abusive past. But then instead of being like, hey, let me protect you, let me comfort you like a husband should, he's like, I'm gonna take our daughter and go to a hotel, and then you stay here in this house alone and deal with the whole Marsh Keen thing. It's very weird. Like, I understand wanting to protect your daughter, but at the same time, wouldn't you want to protect your wife? And he does come back around, but by the time he comes back around, I'm already kind of like, no, you're kind of a scumbag for leaving your wife. So I don't know. There's just a part of me that didn't like how they wrote that. And then if you were just going to have them loop back around and get together again toward the end of the movie, then why not just start that way? To me, didn't make a lot of sense. You didn't need that middle unless you were just needing to fill runtime with a little bit of tension, like, oh, will they just not be together? Like, it was unnecessary. And the other thing I dislike about this movie is, I've already sort of mentioned it a couple times, but after that first act, it's not a thriller anymore. You just kind of know what's going to happen. There's even a scene where, ooh, maybe the Marsh Keen died in a big car explosion. Maybe he's not around anymore. But as the viewer, you're like, there's an hour left of this runtime. He's not dead. And you know, you can sort of predict it the whole way. And it was funny, I was walking out of the theater and it was just me and like a couple of old people, and they were walking out of the theater in front of me, and the lady turns to her husband and goes, a lot of plot holes in that one. And yeah, there are a lot of plot holes in it, but again, I really just blame the fact that the story gets bland after that opening act. And I think the opening act is really good. I think they do a good job setting up like, ooh, this is a weird abusive relationship and now he's in jail. Okay, what are they going to do to make this thing interesting? And then it's not very interesting. It's just, oh, he's out of jail. Oh, he's after her. Oh, she's going to go after him. Okay, now they're doing this cat and mouse thing. Oh, and the end of the movie happens. And I won't spoil what happens in the end of the movie, but it's very predictable. It's an ending you could see coming from a mile away, which makes this movie a one watch for me. It's a movie I'll never go back to. Like, I'm not going to buy it, put it on the shelf back there and be like, hey, tell my wife, hey, E, let's check this thing out. Let's watch it. Let's watch it for a movie night. Let's get your thoughts on it. I just think she'd be bored by it. And she loves those kind of books. This might be a book that she enjoys reading, but I don't think it'd be a movie she'd enjoy watching because, again, it just gets very paint by numbers once you get past that opening act. Overall, I'll say that if you like book to movie adaptions about a girl running from a very abusive relationship, then I think you'll enjoy this movie because this movie is just that. But unfortunately, it doesn't do anything new for the genre. It doesn't do anything new toward the end of this movie. It doesn't have a twist ending where you're like, oh, I never saw that coming. Nope, nothing like that. It's just very much so what you predict is going to happen, and that's too bad. But those are just my opinions because that's my review for The Marsh Keen's Daughter. Guys, have you seen The Marsh Keen's Daughter yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know if you liked it, if you disagree or agree with me on the things that I said in this movie review. And finally, if you like this review and you want to watch more of them, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of the Marsh Keen's Daughter movie review. I think this is the only movie in November that I really had no hope for. I do have a little bit of hope for the Marvels. Not saying it's going to be great, but I have a little bit of hope. With all that said though, guys, if you like this review and you want to check out more, well, I've got all of my 2022 reviews right there, or all of my 2023 reviews right there.